Hello and welcome back. We were talking about Nakamoto style consensus. I hope we kind of agree what the goal is by now and the overall kind of design of the system. And then what I want to do now in this video here is to dive into this magic lottery. How do we pick a random peer in a huge distributed peer-to-peer system where I don't even know who the peers are? I might know 100 out of 1 million peers, and still I should somehow participate in electing a random one of them as a leader. Let's dive into it. So just a very quick recap of the setting here. Nakamoto style consensus, the overall design. We wanted this lottery that would allow us to pick a random leader for each slot, or each round. Then that leader would announce what the next block is. If we're unlucky and the lottery announces 2 leaders in different parts of the system, they might create 2 blocks and point at the same previous block, creating a tree. And then to fix that, we made this longest chain rule, namely that you should always, if you're honest, build on the longest chain in your tree and use some deterministic tiebreaker. And that then, if 51% of the winners are honest, will tend to build a longest chain. It's clear, right, that if 50% of the winners are corrupted, we can't achieve this because they might always just choose to build, on the shortest chain here. So in a setting like this here, the corrupted could just build here, even though this is considered the longest chain. So the honest will be building a chain here, the corrupted a chain here. And if it's 50-50, they will be equally long and arbitrarily long, so we don't achieve an agreement. So really the best we can do is to achieve agreement with 51% honesty, and in fact we do that. The system is better if it's 75% honesty, then we'll get agreement quicker. But that's something for video 4 in the sequence on Nakamoto style consensus. Okay, so that's kind of the setting. And then what I want to do in this video is dive into this distributed lottery. So again, before we look at how it's done, let's look at what kind of properties we would like from a system like this here. Maybe just one word, just to take the magic out of the properties. In fact, just one very quick kind of word on how it's done, for example, in Bitcoin. In Bitcoin, the way it's done is you will locally solve a puzzle. So you don't talk to anybody. We'll just try to solve a little puzzle, computational puzzle, locally. And if you're the first one to solve the puzzle, then you're the winner of the lottery. That's how it works. I will return to that in much more detail in a slide from now. Okay, so what properties would we want from a distributed lottery for a totally ordered broadcast channel running on top of a peer-to-peer system implementing a autonomous cryptocurrency? The first one is we would like that when you participate in the lottery, you don't talk to anyone about it. So it's actually not a protocol. You only do local computations. And the reason for this is to have this denial of service attack resilience. If somehow, to participate in the lottery, you would have to tell someone that you're taking part in the lottery. Already there, you open up for denial of service attacks. The adversary will be, aha, this is a potential winner of the next round. Let me target with my denial of service attack this machine here and take it down. So certainly if the lottery proceeds only by local computation, we protect it against that. Also, that gives scalability in that in running the lottery, there's actually no communication in the system. So you don't have all these 1 million participants in the lottery sending out values on the network, which is nice for scalability. Okay. That's why in Bitcoin you're solving a local puzzle. So then we would like non-predictability. So we want that even if you know who is taking part in the lottery, you know it's these 1 million servers here in the system. Maybe you have an idea that it's everyone in the peer-to-peer network. You can't predict which of them will win the lottery. So out of these 1 million peers, a random one should become the next winner. The beauty of that then is if you want to do a denial of service attack on the next winner, you would have to do a denial of service attack on everyone in the network, which is hopefully infeasible. So that's again a property that's nice to have for denial of service attack resilience. Yet, of course, you should be able to prove that you won the lottery. I mean, one way to think about non-predictability, if we think about national lotteries where you buy a lottery ticket, right? If you just make sure to keep your numbers secret, of course, no one can predict who will be the winner of the lottery because you don't know the lottery numbers of your neighbor, only your own ones. Yet we should have public verifiability, namely you should be able to prove if you won, otherwise it's a silly lottery. You could do that with your lottery ticket, or in Bitcoin, you would be sending the solution to the puzzle that you were solving. Okay. And then finally, I mean, later to prove that you won, this should be doable by sending a single message. It's not that there should be some complicated back and forth protocol to do that. You send off your lottery ticket and show I won. And the reason for that, again, is denial of service attack resilience. If you had to speak several times to prove that you won, the adversary would have too long time to come and actually take you down with a denial of service attack, because the second you send your first message, your IP address becomes known. And then the adversary will know, oh, the winner is over there. Let's take him out before he gets to send the next block to break the system. Yeah. Finally, the lottery should, as we discussed, be secure against the Sybil attacks, where an adversary, to make sure to win the lottery more often than others, would just add more servers, for example, to the network. So the lottery somehow have to be bound up onto this resource we were talking about in the previous video. If we're assuming that, let's say, at most 49% of the computing power in the system is corrupted, then somehow the ability to win the lottery should be tied up to your computing power. So we ensure that 51% of the winners of the lottery are honest. It should not just be that we pick a random machine, because that adversary could just put on like more machines, virtual machines, millions of them. And if the resource we are assuming is, I mean, if we're saying we assume that at least 51% of the money stored in the system belong to honest parties, then somehow the lottery should be tied up to the money instead. So if we can tie the probability of winning the lottery directly to this resource, and you assume that the majority of the resources are controlled by honest parties, you also get that 51% of the winners of the lottery are honest. And we recall that we need that, because we will be building these longest chains, hopefully. And for one of the chains to become the longest one, we actually need that at least 51% of the winners of the lottery are honest. Okay. Let's look at how Bitcoin did it. So in Bitcoin, I mean, the lottery is about who gets to extend on a given block. So when you participate in the lottery, and let's say your tree is looking like this here, you have to first agree on which block here you are intending to extend on. And then you participate in the lottery to be allowed to extend the tree here. If you're honest, of course, you should pick the longest chain. But in principle, a corrupted server could choose to participate in the lottery for extending here. There's a lottery for each leaf in the tree. In fact, you could also go up here, because that was the leaf once, and try to win the right to extend up here. Which would probably, even for corrupted party, be silly. If you want to kind of destroy the property that there is the longest chain, you should try to extend here. But that's a different discussion for when we start analyzing. Okay, so what's the lottery? So let's call this here A. This block down here, we call it A. That's the block you would like to extend. Then we assume also that we have a hash function like SHA-256. You heard about that in previous lectures. And then what we do is compute a so-called address. So you take this block here. This is probably a huge thing, megabytes big, because it's a list of transactions. So you hash it, and that gives you a 256-bit kind of name of the block. And then that's what you will be using in the lottery. For each name of a block, there is a lottery to extend that one. It's also called an address sometimes. Then when you participate in the lottery, what you will have to do is generate a key pair for signature scheme. This need not be registered anywhere. It's not like you don't have to have a public key in the system registered in some PKI or something, a public key infrastructure. You just generate a new one. Whenever you want to run the lottery, generate a new key pair. And VK here is just the verification key of that key pair that you chose to use in the lottery now. The reason why you do this is to get kind of an identity. I mean, we need to know who won the lottery, and you are baking this thing here into your puzzle, your winning puzzle. And then when you prove later that to someone that this VK here won the lottery, then it's a nice thing that only you have the secret key. So you're the only one that can act on behalf of the winner. That's why it's done like that. Then there's a counter, which kind of corresponds to how many tickets you're buying in the lottery. And you're allowed to compute as many, buy as many as you want. And then finally, there's a hardness level. For example, h equals 30. This is on an exponential scale. It talks about how hard it is to win the lottery. So it would be 2 to the 30 hard to win the lottery. Or you can also think of it as kind of saying how many tickets on average you need to buy to win the lottery. Okay. And then the puzzle is finally, you take the hash function, you hash the verification key, you hash the address of the block you want to extend on. So you're saying, I'm VK, I would like to extend this block. And then you're allowed to put in here any counter you want. And there's really no reason not to just make it 1, 2, 3, 4. So you compute it for a lot of different counters. And you get an output Y. Think of Y as one ticket in the lottery. And how does it win? This ticket here wins if the 8 first bits of this bit string here is all zeros. I'll return to that in a second, but the reason why that is done is these hash functions here. I mean, we sometimes model them as random oracles, namely functions which on any given input outputs a uniformly random bit string, except that of course, if it gets the same input twice, it gives the same output twice. It's a way to model that we think the outputs of hash functions behave pretty much random. It's hard to make the output have a particular property. So for example, it's very hard to find an output of a hash function where the first, let's say, 30 bits are 0. We think the best way you can do that is just try to compute the hash function many times until it happens at random. And now, what's the probability that the first 30 bits of a random string are 0? Well, it's 2 to the minus 30, right? So 1 divided by 2 to the 30. So for each ticket, that's your probability of winning. So if you look at how many times do you need to iterate that to actually win, it would be exactly 2 to the 30. So it gets the hardness you want. You would have to buy or compute 2 to the 30 tickets now to somehow get lucky and win. And this gets this property we discussed of this ties up the probability of winning to your computing power, right? There's no way around it. If you want to win the lottery, you need to compute this hash function 2 to the 30 times. And you can't pretend to be several parties and have more probability of winning the lottery. You need to put in the work to win the lottery. So we get a 1-to-1 mapping between probability of winning the lottery and your computing power, which is the resource where we assume that most of the parties have, where the honest parties have most of that resource. That's the rationale for winning the lottery. Then what do you do if you win the lottery? Well, you won it by finding some counter here, such that when you hash your verification key and the address here, then this Y here has 30 zeros on it. Now you want to extend with a block down here, and you want to avoid man-in-the-middle attacks, where you send one block and someone will change the block. So you sign it, and you sign it with the secret key that corresponds to the verification key that you use to win the lottery. So you compute your block, you compute a new block, the one you want to add down here. You fill it up with the transactions you think should be in the next block. Then you send along the verification key you want use to win the lottery, the address of the previous block here, the hash of that block to say I want to extend there, the counter that you use for winning the lottery, the block, and then a signature on the block under the secret key of that verification key there. This is a signature key that only you, the winner of the lottery, knows. What will the other peers in the network do when they get a value like this? Well, first they check that this verification key actually won the lottery. So they hash VK along with A and C. And then they take 8 here also to be the block that the winner intended to extend on. Note that in transit, no one can change A, because if you change A, then of course Y here is a new thing, and then it wouldn't win the lottery anymore. So this address is already authenticated kind of by sitting under the hash, which is why we didn't sign it up here. And then they will also check. Did I put here? That is S. That's the signature. So they check that under this verification key with the signature, this block here actually is, the signature is valid. So the one that created this verification key actually wanted this to be the block. You might ask in a system like this here, why wouldn't you just hash, let's say, the block along here? The thing about that is it's just nice to implementation-wise to take these two things apart. So you do one thing here to win, and then once you won, you build the block. And because that at this point there might be new transactions coming in. So you take the transactions you have, put them in the block, sign it, and ship it off. If you put it in here, you would constantly have to update the block that you were hashing along here when you want to send it along, which is not so nice to implement. But you could have done that and then saved that signature down here. And you do see both of these versions in live systems. But that's kind of the idea. From a crypto point of view, the most important point here being, authentication, that you actually sign off on the block that you want to add, so only the winner can do it. And this in particular means whenever we have a unique, honest winner, we will get one block here that everyone agrees should kind of extend here on the longest chain. Okay. And this is kind of what I said already. So this is talking about how is it that this kind of proof of work lottery avoids Sybil attacks. And it's exactly because we are tying the number of lottery tickets, so we say, up to your computing power. If you have hardness like 30 bits, then you would get something like, I think 1 billion, probability 1 billion per try to win. So you would have to compute the hash function 1 billion times to win the lottery. And since we're assuming that most of the honest parties, since we assume that most of the computing power is controlled by the honest parties, otherwise we're in trouble, then most of the winners of the lottery will be honest. So that's the basic assumption behind the Bitcoin system. We can discuss whether it's reasonable or not, but that's the assumption under which it works. Most of the computing power should be controlled by parties that adhere to the longest chain rule. Okay, that's it. Right now, The hardness in Bitcoin is not set to be 2 to the 30, but it's set instead to be a crazy 10 to the 20. And the reason for this is that besides having most of the winners of the lottery being honest, recall that we also needed that not too often we get this kind of forking here, because you have two honest winners at the same time. So we need the winning events to be spaced out in time, such that one honest block has time to propagate to all other honest parties before the next honest party is a winner and has to add its new block. So that you tend to build a chain and not like a very bushy kind of tree. And as it turns out right now, the total amount of computing power in the Bitcoin network is so high that to make sure that the winning events are spaced out enough, so Bitcoin is running with 10-minute block times, you need to set the hardness this high. We'll talk much more about this block times compared to corruption levels and when is the tree healthy later. But this is why the hardness is this high, is to force that the block time is spaced out with 10 minutes about them. We'll return a little bit to that, what that means later, because it also means that, I mean, for each block you produce, you needed to compute about that many hashes, which is actually consuming a mind-blowing amount of energy, which is of course silly because you're just trying to elect a leader in a network. So by today, this is by far the best way to do it. It's burning way too much energy. We'll talk a little bit about that later. The modern way to do the lottery is called proof of stake. So let me take you through that. Here we're shifting from the resource being computational power to the resource being money stored in the cryptocurrency that's running on top of the totally ordered broadcast channel. Now, to take part in the lottery, you actually need a verification key that's known by the other parties. Luckily, as we know, if you're running a cryptocurrency on top of your totally ordered broadcast channel, then with each account, there is a verification key of a signature scheme, namely the one you use to sign with if you want to transfer money out of the account. So only those verification keys now can take part in the lottery. We also know from looking at the totally ordered broadcast channel, we know for each verification key, the amount of money on that account. And for now, we'll just use that as the number of tickets you get in the system. So if you have 10 money, you get 10 tickets. If you have a million money, you have a million tickets. Again, we assume a hash function, SHA-256. Now there's a slot. So now instead of making a lottery on who gets to extend this block here, you make a lottery for each point in time. You can just space them out, like for every 10 seconds, we have a slot. So slots are just, think of them as mapping one-to-one to points in time. So if our block time is 10 seconds, then slot 1 is at time 0 when we started running the system. Slot 2 is at time 10 seconds after starting running the system. Slot 3 is 20 seconds after running the systems. I should have index from 0, but you get the point. So it's just marking out some uniformly spaced out points in time where we run the lottery. These are points in time where potentially we would like someone to get the right to add a block. And that's kind of now what the lottery is about. And then the number that we put inside the block indicates that this block here is a block that was added because someone won the lottery at this point in time, at time 18. Okay. So how do you get the right to produce a block at time 18? Well, you do something very simple. You sign the slot number. So remember, you have the verification key here. So you take the signing key, and then you sign 18. In practice, you put much more in there to make sure you're not accidentally signing something that's used in another protocol, but you put in some identifiers, some nonces, blah, blah, blah. But for now, let's just think about you signing 18. That gives you a signature. You hash it. That gives you a random number. That's your ticket. Now, because we want the money on the account to we want your probability of winning to be proportional to the amount of money you have in the system, you get to take this random number, multiply it by the amount on your account, and then you win the lottery if this here is larger than some hardness. And that's what there is to it. For this here to work, we return to that the signatures need to be unique. So there's not for each slot multiple valid signatures, because a corrupted party could cheat and get multiple chances like that. But besides that, so if we assume that, let's say the signature here on a given value is unique, I mean, this here works then because for each slot you have a unique signature that is kind of your ticket. You hash it. That gives a random number, which is your ticket, and you can't manipulate it because the signature is unique. So this is really, this forces you to use this random number in the lottery at that slot. Then, I mean, if it's higher than the hardness here, then you won. So there's no way to manipulate the system. You can just check if you won. You kind of get like a lottery number per like 10 seconds. You couldn't pre-compute all of them. And then whenever it's higher than this hardness, you won the lottery. And then we're just multiplying by A here to get to scale it with how much is on your account. That's the lottery. Now to send out a block, you do something very similar to before, as before. But now you also, because the lottery was about winning the right to extend at a given slot, you also have to now sign where you want to extend. Before that was kind of the address that went into the lottery, and that was authenticated like that. But now we just sign off on it. Otherwise, it's basically the same way you add a block. So let's say I won the lottery at slot 20. I want to put a block here, and I want to extend here at 18 because I'm honest and I'm using the longest chain rule. Then I will compute a hash of this block A here. It gives the address. I should have been a small a here to be consistent with the other slides. The address. Anyway, let's ignore that for now. You put your VK here, you send that to. You put the slot that you claim to have won. Then you send along your signature on the slot number. The nice thing being, this is something that the receiver can recognize or validate, so you can check that you won the lottery. And then you also send along a signature on the hash here of A that, I mean, you're signing off on, I want to extend this block. And then you send along also the signature on the block you actually want to add, the list of transactions you want to add. And then the receivers will first verify this signature here. It's this one here. That this is in fact a correct signature on slot. Then they will hash it, multiply it by your amount of money on your account, which they can get from the totally ordered broadcast channel. And then they check that that is above the hardness. And if so, they know that you won. So you could at this point prove to them that you won. The cool thing is they can't check this before they get the signature, which only you can compute. So it has this nice property of being random, but unpredictable by other parties until you won, but you can prove that you won and then send it along. And finally, of course, then they also verify that under the same verification key, this signature over here was a correct signature on H and B. And if so, they take this B and add it in the tree to the block which matches this hash here. If there is no matching block, they just throw it away. Or rather, they store it, and then if later a block comes in that matches it, they would put it in. That's a different story. We'll talk about that later. They put it into the tree if it matches their current tree. And then it's added to the tree. Okay, that's proof of stake. So why is this Sybil attack consistent? Remember, we would like that 51% of the winners are honest. So who's winning in this lottery here? And if we go back one slide, we see that to win the lottery, when you sign this slot here and multiply it by this random number here by your amount of money, it should be harder than the hardness. The hardness, the probability of this is proportional to A. This is a uniformly random number here. And then you scale it with A. So this probability here just goes up linearly with A. So it just means the more money you have in the system linearly, the higher probability you have of winning the lottery. In particular, if the honest parties control 51% of the money in the system, then they will be winning 51% of the blocks. There are some slight caveats in some probabilities there, but it can be worked out. It can be said such that this is true. So basically now the assumption is that for this to work, we need that 51% of the stake is controlled by parties that is using the longest chain rule. As opposed to the proof of work setting, where we kind of just had to assume that 51% of the computing power was controlled by honest parties. Here we can actually make an argument that this is a reasonable assumption. So now we're assuming that the honest parties are controlling 51% of the money in the system. Remember, first of all, only people that have money in the system is allowed to run it. What does it mean to have money in the system? It means that you have this cryptocurrency that is stored on an account in the system. What would happen to the value of your cryptocurrency, let's say Bitcoin or whatever it's called, if the system turns out to not work? It's all the way not in agreement, the money are lost, it blows up complete, and the money are gone. Well, your money are gone. Okay? So now the system is being run by people that have money in the system. And those money are only worth, this cryptocurrency is only worth something if the system is healthy. And the system is healthy if 51% of the people running the system is doing it honestly. So certainly it seems very reasonable, right? That you have the system run by the people that, for which it's valuable that the system is honest. So that's the story about proof of stake. Just make sure that, it's run by the people that actually have an interest in having the system being honest. And then probably it's reasonable to assume that not more than half of the users of the system will break it, right? It's seldom that half of the people that have money in a bank turn up and then burn down the bank. We don't see that so much. Okay, so that's the proof of stake. That's too much of an eyesore, so I correct it now. There you go. Proof of stake and why Sybil attack resilient. There's other reasons to prefer proof of stake, also environmental considerations. If we look at how much work goes into running the lottery, it's quite different, particularly if we allow ourselves to now just, let's say, focus down on how many times are this hash function computed. So let's say we have a proof of stake lottery where we run a lottery every second. Let's say we have 10,000 nodes. That's a small network. In today's practice, it's a large network. But of course, the dream for crypto anarchists is to reach networks with millions of nodes. But I don't think there are networks out there today with more than 10,000 nodes. So how often throughout the system are we computing a hash? Well, we are computing each party is computing one hash for each slot. So we would every second have each of these nodes compute one hash. They assign a slot, then they hash it, and then they see if this, when multiplied by their stake, is larger than the hardness. So we will have roughly 10,000 hashes per second. And remember that I told you that in Bitcoin, because there's so much computing power around, the hardness was set to be 10 to the 20 to space out the winning events enough. So that means in Bitcoin, roughly, we need to divide this here to make it minutes and not seconds, but roughly in Bitcoin, you're computing this many per second. It's rather per 10 minutes, so you would have to take 1 or 2 zeros off here to make it minutes and not seconds. Let's take off 2 to be safe, okay? But still you see that the order of magnitudes is almost uncountable. It's like, let's do it. Let's take off 2 here. Let's take off 4 more. 1, 2, 3, 4. Then 1, 2, 3, 4. 4. That's 12. There's 2 more. That is 14. There's 14th order of magnitude in terms of energy consumption in running Bitcoin compared to a modern proof of stake blockchain. The bad news about this is that we see that the way Bitcoin did the lottery was really silly, and extremely energy wasteful. The good news is, I mean, this notion that cryptocurrencies are somehow, very energy consuming is also a thing of the past. Modern blockchains doesn't really use any energy to compute this lottery. And somehow at a mental level, that should also be the case, right? Because it's trying to solve a really silly problem, namely just electing a random peer in the system and making sure 51% of them are honest. There's no reason that you would have to burn as much energy as Denmark to do that. I mean, it's completely insane, right? So, I mean, that's a good thing. And that's also why in the coming slides, we'll be focusing on proof of stake, because that's really the future of how to run these distributed batteries. Okay, so that was a lot of detail about the lottery. But it's also nice to kind of have it in place and under the skin. I mean, how is it that we pick these winners at random in the system and reasonably believe that most of them are honest? What I will do now in the next slide then is kind of put a bit more detail on how this tree is growing and a little bit more detail on how is the particular proof of stake lottery that we're using in the book, how is it done? Just to have like a very concrete setting. And then in the fourth video of the Syrian Nakamoto style consensus, we then try to analyze that protocol. Okay, so that's the 2 upcoming videos. The exact details of the protocol, putting the pieces we looked at now together and putting in a few more details, and then analyzing that protocol. Okay. Thanks for listening.